This podcast is brought to you by Connect First Credit Union. So welcome back. We're telling stories. We're sharing stories about what's going on here in Alberta and some of the great stories that I think are inspiring all of us to see that there is a brighter future ahead. You know, we've talked about this before, but there's no question Alberta's facing some of the most severe challenges we've had probably in over a generation. We all know that. Like, you know, you can't hide from it. You open a newspaper, you see it. You go online, you see it. But the thing is, there are great things happening every single day. Today, our theme is about, talking about from small business to big success. And certainly, when we hear that, we often think about the big global success stories, the Uber success stories. But quite frankly, the best success stories and the ones that are happening every day are the ones that often don't get told. You know, I sometimes feel old. I'm not going to lie. When I look in the mirror, I see this older person looking back at me than I often feel like I am in my own head. But with some of the gray hair I've collected along the way, I've collected a few experiences. And one of those things is I've been very fortunate to literally have been involved in investing in lending to working with entrepreneurs and business owners from across this country over the years, literally have met thousands of entrepreneurs. And, you know, you'd be surprised perhaps to find out that actually the big success stories are more frequent than you'd think. You sometimes think it's like winning a lottery if you become that Uber success story. And in fact, it's happening every day. And it takes people with grit, with determination, with big ideas and a passion and a commitment following through to make them happen. And I think back to one story in particular, and I remember it just stuck with me over the years. An individual who had this idea, and he had a little metal banging shop, and this is in Eastern Canada at the time, actually, and where I lived at that point in my life. This is back in the 90s. And this little metal banging shop, he had this big idea of what if I created these really beautiful stainless steel garbage and recycling cans, essentially, and then I would sell advertising on the front, and I would actually gift them, he said, to the municipalities who would be willing to take them. And he was fortunate enough to work out a deal with a few municipalities, raise a little bit of capital so that he could build some of these free garbage cans. He even went as far as saying he would collect the garbage and recycling from these cans for a while, so making it like zero pain for the municipalities he was installing these in. And you know, and it's funny, this is a business that I'm sure most of us have never heard of, and it's now got, and I think at some point along the way it was sold to a large private equity firm or something like that. They've gone on to great success, but these garbage cans are everywhere. They're right here in Calgary. They're in municipalities across this province and across North America, and it started with a little idea that seemed just a little bit different, and it became something significant. And through my past 25 plus years in this business, I've had that opportunity to meet a few, and today I'm really, really excited to share and to introduce you to a really exciting entrepreneur who's right here in Alberta doing amazing things right now. His name's Ted Fleming. He's the CEO and founder of Partake Brewing, but that's not his whole story. We're going to talk a lot about Partake, a really exciting organization, but he's done some really interesting things over the years. He's also been a guest on Dragon's Den, which I think is very, very cool, and I'm sure you've got a lot of stories that go along with that. Great stories. You've lived all over Canada, Ted. You've experienced it all, and yet you're right here, right now. You've started a business some time ago that is really taking the whole nation by storm in a unique way, and I can't wait to get to your story. So start off, Ted. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Partake and how it all came to be.
Well, thanks so much for having me on the show. How did Partake start? Well, it's a long journey. I go back to 2005, and at that point in my life, I was living in Toronto. I'd graduated from university a few years prior, kind of just trying to get my feet underneath me from a career perspective. And, unfortunately in that year, I had what I thought was going to be just a routine medical appointment, a checkup, and you go in, you go through the motions, and then you're out and life's back to normal. Unfortunately for me, in that appointment, I was told that I had Crohn's disease, and it didn't really register with me. I think I was still that, young guy, very athletic. I was playing sports at a professional level and really thought, okay, well, we'll just ignore this and, it won't bother me. And I got away with some of that for a few years, but it wasn't really until 2010. At that point, I was married. I just had became a dad for the first time. I had a beautiful young daughter, and my wife and I and our daughter, we went on vacation to the Mediterranean, and we were having a great vacation. But as you know, is typical for a lot of people when they go on vacation, they let their guard down. They maybe drink too much. They stay up too late. They maybe eat too much, eat the wrong things, and unfortunately, that all added up for me in a hospital visit. And I had a great view of the Mediterranean, but I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV, and because we had a newborn, they couldn't come to visit just because of the potential risk of coming into a hospital environment. So I really had some time to kind of think and reflect on sort of where things were with my life and where I wanted them to go. And I think being a new dad was a big part of that, but also this realization that I had to make some serious changes and eating healthier, taking my health, sleep, all aspects of health more seriously, and really prioritizing things that were important to me going forward. It was a very pivotal moment in my life. And so, that's where coming out of that, giving up alcohol was one of those more specific things that I decided I needed to do. And I looked for non-alcoholic beer as a way to substitute, because I was definitely a fan of craft beer. And when you give it up, you realize, wow, I drink a lot of beer, not because I'm an alcoholic necessarily,
you enjoy beer,
but just I enjoy the taste, played a lot of sports, drinking beer afterwards was just part of that social experience, weddings, holidays. It's very, very pervasive. And so, I struggled to make that change I wanted to make permanent, because there weren't good alternatives in the non-alc space. And that's sort of how Partake came to be.
Well, first of all, I am sympathetic, because I'm a beer lover too. But I found out a few years ago I'm gluten-free. So I have had to become a connoisseur of gluten-free beers. That's harder to come by, but that might be your next business venture. I'd love to see where you go with that next. But this is a really unique space then. So your own personal challenge, and I'm so sorry about that. I do feel for you, but that inspired you to take your business, your life in a whole new direction. Do you want to share a little bit around how you got to Partake?
I'm a problem solver at heart. And so first I approached it from I'll solve my own problem. I extended that into an online business with an online store to begin with. And then it was during that time when I was running this online store and building customers and having other people connect with me who were experiencing similar challenges to me that it really changed from like a business to kind of a mission. And it was the positive feedback, and it was the passion with which these people who I didn't know before, and they'd reach out and say, I'm so happy that you're doing what you're doing. You're changing my life. You've made it so much better. And it was kind of that wow moment of, okay, I'm actually doing something with real purpose here for a lot of other people. And it became a mission for Partake to say, okay, well, we need to do this not just in Toronto where we started, but across Canada and then across North America, and who knows from there.
So maybe let's build in the Alberta angle into the story here. What got you here? Because you could have done this anywhere. You've lived all over the country.
Yeah. So why Calgary? That's a good question. So it was actually related to my wife's job. She was headhunted by the city of Calgary. She was working at the city of Toronto at the time, and she had an interview here, and she said to me, we wouldn't really consider moving, would we? And we enjoyed Toronto. Like she grew up there her whole life. I had a lot of family. We had great friends there. Toronto really is a great city for a city of its size. Yeah. But we said, maybe this is the entrepreneur in me, but I said, well, why not?
Yeah.
And so that just got the wheels in motion, and she eventually took the job, and we pulled up stakes in Toronto and came to Calgary, and we've tried to make the most of it. We've got 3 young daughters now. Calgary is a great place to have them grow up with the outdoors just out our back door, literally the mountains. It's a great place to live. And, I think Calgarians, you touched on it in your intro, it's a tough period compared to what Calgarians are used to. But my perspective, having come from Toronto, is there's still a lot of really good things that Calgary has. And, there's tougher times ahead, but that infrastructure, the roads are in great shape, sidewalks, it's clean, the crime is is relatively low. Toronto is a great city, but has some big city problems that Calgary doesn't have, and Calgary still has a feel like it's a smaller community where you can get to know your neighbors and you can get to know people across the city. In Toronto, it's very fragmented in terms of neighborhood. If you could know someone from way back, but if they move on the other side of Yonge Street, it's like, well, you might as well live in another province.
Right on. Yeah, might as well be in Calgary.
Yeah.
I hear you. And it's funny, you're sharing those stories brought back a lot of memories for me. And I found when I came to Calgary, I was really impressed at how welcoming the business community is and how supportive it is. Like I'd lived in a few other cities, and Toronto being one of them, enjoyed it there too. Great city, but very cutthroat, very competitive. It is here too, but what were some of your experiences coming here in the business community?
It took me a while to get that under my belt. I had to actively seek that out, tried to find people in my same business. I was coming from a community in Toronto that I had built and nurtured over a few years. So, it doesn't get replaced right away. The irony is that most of the people that I now interact with on a business perspective, particularly in my industry, food and beverage, are people I meet in Toronto, in California, at these trade shows where we all, when there were trade shows, where we would all, we'd all pick, travel to them because they were, key events. Early on when I moved to Calgary, I made a point of, I'm going to walk the whole show and find every person that's from Calgary and introduce myself. And so that's what I did. And so I've kind of took a proactive approach to kind of build that out.
Your business in Toronto was called Premium Near Beer. Your new business, or the business that you've been operating since 2017, I guess it's not that new at all anymore, is Partake. So you are now a consumer packaged goods company, essentially, and you've been successful to get your product on the shelves. Can you share a little bit of the story around how you went about doing that?
So I think the Premium Near Beer part of the story is important and integral to the success we've had as our own branded CPG product. The 3 years that I spent building that online store, and I didn't really realize it at the time, but I do now with the perspective to look back, is that the important thing that we did was really build community, and we tested products, and we got this consumer insight around what people were looking for in terms of taste profiles. So Partake ended up building and making craft non-alcoholic beer, which was what our customers were saying, why can't we get this? And then at the same time, we built up we built an email list of almost 5,000 people. We had, it was still a small business. We had a couple 100,000 in online sales, but that gave us the foundation to launch our brand that was still early.
Right.
Like retailers weren't, they had non-alcoholic beer on the shelf, but they weren't ready for craft non-alc. We had to prove ourselves out in the minor leagues before we could go to the major leagues. And having our own online community to sell our first batches to and get the feedback from and improve those products in a somewhat low risk environment. I think those two things go together. They're tied together, and they're both important to each other.
Very cool. Now, often entrepreneurs, when they're going to start to knock on the doors of larger retailers and to try to get on the shelf, there's a lot of no's involved. So you got to have a thick skin, be pretty resilient. What was your story in approaching those businesses?
I think we had enough business through online, and we recognized that, okay, it wasn't going to, things weren't going to happen overnight. We were able to take the long approach. I'd already been in the business for 3 years, and it's like, okay, if it's going to take 2 more years to get this off, then that's okay. I still believe in it. There's some challenging conversations as you go through that process, because you have a dream and a vision, and before it gets there, there are some tough times and challenges, and you have to persevere through that. But I think it's an important part of the journey, and I think anyone that's going to make something big and something important has to go through that trial.
Now, a lot of people think consumer packaged goods are going to be an important growth segment for Alberta. We're a producer of a lot of food here. Primary producer of grains and you name it, right? And thinking, how do we do a better job of converting those products into finished goods that we can sell? And you're leading by example here for others. Any advice to other entrepreneurs who are thinking that they want to get into the CPG industry?
I think it's a very exciting industry. I've had a lot of fun here. I had no idea when I, was in university or after I graduated. I was an engineer. I'd worked in renewable power. I'd worked in water
Right on.
treatment
Yeah.
system design. Nothing to do with beer. Although I think when every engineer is at university, they say, "Oh, I'm gonna, end up working at a brewery." But most of the time, that doesn't happen. But so it was a unforeseen career path for me, but I'm so glad, this is where I am. It's a great community. It's very collaborative. It's exciting. There's a lot of growth. It's not tech, but it- it's there's a lot of great stories out there of brands that
sure.
have just come from seemingly nowhere. And I know that, nowhere means 10 years behind of toil before
Right.
you kind of hit the big stage. But um, it's a very exciting and rewarding business, and it's challenging as well. And I think if you can position a product or a brand that solves a real problem for people like we do, there's even more to it than that.
It's funny when people think about innovation, they often go right to technology, right? They think of high tech, or they think of these bio companies that are developing vaccines or what have you. Actually, there's incredible innovation happening all over the place. In your case, you're solving really, I think, some very unique market needs that probably were just either undiscovered or unrecognized or what have you, and you're developing products in a very unique space in a very innovative way. Any stories around how you were pushing, like as you're developing products that had never been created before? Any trials and tribulations along the way?
Yeah, I go back to our very first batch, and we'd use Kickstarter as a way to kind of pre-fund our first
Cool.
production run, and tying back to our online community through Premium Near Beer, we were able to raise $30,000. We only needed 10,000, I think, to get the project off the ground, but we had such a great base of connected customers and community that we hit that goal within 24 hours. So
Cool.
it was a really successful Kickstarter. Going to production was still a challenge. We didn't actually have a manufacturer lined up, but between actually having the money in the bank and at least having the online community, I was able to coax a manufacturer into making our batch. And it was still very, out there from a brewer's perspective. They just didn't want to, they didn't think this had long-term prospects. They didn't want to, they don't
Right.
want customers that don't have, larger checks associated with them for them. So it was difficult, but I found a producer to make it for me. Our first batch, gave them the recipe. We had some professional brewers work on our side. So we were pretty confident that we had something that was commercially viable that could be made on a commercial brewery. But when it came out, it was way too bitter. It was supposed to be an IPA, but it came out way too bitter and way too cloudy from what our spec was.
Right.
And so we had this choice of, do we put this out and say that this is what we intended, or don't we? And I took the approach that we went out and said to all our customers, hey, we got our first batch, and we were already delayed a few months, which by Kickstarter standards is early. But still, people,
Fair.
we were
Yeah.
hoping to have it by summer, and
Right
now
on.
this was September. And so customers were like, okay, you're late. We want our product. So I had to go out and say to them, look, we got our first batch done. That's the good news. The bad news is it didn't turn out the way we expected. So I'm not going to send this to you and say that it is. However, if you like really hoppy beer or cloudy beer, there's nothing wrong with this. It's just not what we
Right.
intended. So if you want it, we're happy to send it to you. So we ended up being able to ship about half that batch to people who said, okay, I'll take it. And so that got us out of a bit of a sticky situation. And then we did the next batch and got that out. But everyone was understanding of it. We got almost no negative feedback and positive feedback. The only negative feedback is people today still say to me, I won't buy anything from you until you bring back that very first batch of super hoppy IPA, which we called it hoppy accident
Okay.
version. So that will be coming
That's
back
awesome.
to our online store at some point in 2021. But that's kind of our earliest story of challenge around manufacturing.
So, you've become quite a success. You're one of Alberta's fastest growing companies. You've got products on the shelf globally, essentially. You're you've had international success. Big part of the process to get there, of course, is fundraising and all the work you did, the unrecognized work. I'm sure most of the time people see the finished product on the shelf, they don't realize how much work goes behind it. But can you share any stories? It might be inspiring for others to hear how you went about raising capital for your business.
I consider myself quite lucky in that my wife and I had been, both been good savers generally over the early parts of our career. Certainly to take the leap and say, I'm not going to take a regular salary from a larger business and give that up for the pursuit of an uncertain dream. I think you need to have some stability financially there. So I consider myself lucky, and I'm grateful that was my situation. Early on, we took a very, and I say we, the business as a whole. Right now, we're a 15, 20 person company, so it's a larger we than it used to be. It's very important to kind of use your cash judiciously. In hindsight, I was doing a lot of things right, but I didn't realize it at the time. But now I can point back and say, look, we were really just in the testing phase. We were testing an idea. We were getting a sense of, is this going to work? We're kind of laying the foundation for bigger things down the road, even though we didn't know what those necessarily were. And we did that in a very fiscally prudent way. So it did take money to do it, but we weren't, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to get it off the ground. When Partake launched, that required more capital. So I think the next step for a lot of people is going out to friends and family and getting some money that way, which is, often people call it love money, which it has a few less strings attached than if you go to professional investors or banks. So that was sort of the next step for us as we launched Partake into a few different varieties. And then once we started to get bigger retailers, we were actually able to work with some financial institutions and BDC to get some capital. But more recently, we raised our first round of institutional money. But I think our discipline around spending, and we were actually able to be profitable in 2019, which I think for our size of consumer packaged goods company is extremely rare. That was certainly something we're proud of. I would also say in the Canadian context, there are a lot of grant opportunities, and I think it's incumbent upon owners and of businesses to seek those out, because those can make the difference between a business getting through a tough period or not.
So as you probably know, at Connect First, we're on a journey. We're trying to reinvent what a credit union should look like for the 2020s, and really trying to throw out a lot of the things we thought we knew and try to solve problems in new and different ways. And there's a fair amount of exciting things happening for us. But I take a lot of inspiration from your story around how you've had the patience to try things, test things, change things. And certainly something that we want to be doing more of in our organization. And I love the inspiration you're providing to us. The next question I have for you, so great, you've mastered your product, but you need to build a brand. And marketing is so essential. I think to myself that when you're in the consumer packaged goods industry where you're competing with millions, literally, globally, of different brands, how do you get your brand to stand out? So what was your thinking to get Partake to stand out on the shelf?
At the very beginning, just even on the branding concept side, so this was before we launched on Kickstarter, we had to have a lot of this done. We came up with some ideas, we crowdsourced it, again, going back to this community that we'd already built of people who were like-minded and wanted us to succeed. We could go out to these groups and say, hey, these are our 5 concepts, which one do you like best and why? And we were able to crowdsource a lot of these aspects. And I think, again, unique to us in consumer packaged goods is we haven't really changed our branding in 3 years. Often there's a rebrand that happens.
Sure.
Like you get some institutional money. First thing that happens is like, we're gonna refresh this thing. That hasn't happened with us. I think we kept to some principles, which were, keep it simple, have a consistent brand across your different styles. Even going against what is traditional wisdom in craft beer, I think a lot of the craft brewers from an artwork point of view are, they're competing to see who can have the craziest looking can. We went the opposite direction and said, okay, we just want consumers to know, they can see our product from across the room and know that that's a Partake.
Yeah, right
Or
on.
they can see it on shelf, and it's accessible to people that aren't necessarily into craft beer.
Right.
So we were trying to really widen the tent and make the tent bigger and more inclusive craft beer. We had to make a brand that was approachable. So those are some of the principles that we kept in mind in terms of the aesthetic of our brand. Clearly, my brand story is a differentiator as well, right? And that's that piece of authenticity is it has resonance.
Yeah.
It's not like the front and center for our brand, but it's a piece of the story that I think helps people say this is a brand I want to support, versus this is a brand that just wants money out of my pocket.
I love it. And, I totally subscribe to your thinking around the authenticity and how important that is to the brand. And not to try and, build parallels with our story at Connect First, but we brought back the word credit union. And, you'll find that very few credit unions in Alberta had been profiling the fact they're a credit union, because I don't think it's because anybody was embarrassed of it. In fact, the opposite. But I would say they felt that it was maybe associated with who we used to be instead of who we want to be. We're bringing it back. So even though we're going to be bringing the best technology, the best everything to our membership, we're going from last to first pretty quickly here. And as we go to launch our new brand and market, credit union is going to be profiled really heavily, because that is who we are, and we are proud of it. But I have another question for you. You made a really exciting announcement in September. Tell us more about that.
We raised our first institutional equity round, which was a $4 million US round. And we did it in the heart of COVID, which I don't recommend other entrepreneurs generally try to avoid global pandemics. For the first one in 100 years, which has all kinds of uncertainty. It was challenging. I think we were going into it in sort of December, January. Equity markets were nice and frothy. COVID was hardly on the radar screen. You might hear
good time to be fundraising.
Occasional story from China, but it wasn't really big on the news.
Yeah.
So, and then early in March, there was a big trade show in Los Angeles, and it got canceled because a lot of the big companies pulled out, and that was sort of the first drop in the bucket, I think, where we started to realize, or at least our industry did, that okay, there's something here. And then it just got into trying to close a deal where you couldn't travel, you couldn't meet people face to face. And I think the learning out of that process for me was that you need to build relationships much in advance of whenever you're going to need that relationship, right?
Yeah,
So for us, all the people that invested were people that we had at least 6 months, if not more, relationships with, whether it was through a business relationship, whether it was just, having somewhat regular conversations. There was this trust factor that you build. All the new conversations we had, and we had, plenty. None of them came through. They may come through on subsequent rounds because we're starting to lay that groundwork and continuing to do so. But I think that core lesson is, if you're raising money, you just need to start building those relationships a year in advance, if not sooner. Our lead investor was someone we'd been talking to for 2.5 years.
There you go. I think that's great advice. Here's the big question, right? The elephant in the room. So why has your product done so well when so many other challengers have been struggling? Like, what have you done differently?
Yeah, I think for us, we really hit the mark on taste, particularly for craft beer lovers. And then, from there, with our IPA as the starting product, we were able to extend that out to a whole bunch of other styles in craft, to craft non-alcoholic beer, which no one else has done. And layer on top of that, we actually have a very unique aspect of our product, which is all of our calorie counts are super low. So our pale ale, which is our best seller across North America, it's only 10 calories a can. So people really gravitate to that because they say this is a genuinely healthy product. Not only is it free of alcohol, which in itself has health benefits, but it's virtually a 0-calorie product that I can enjoy without any repercussions on whether it's a weight issue or people with diabetes, people on keto diet. So it has appeal across, I think, beyond even beer.
That's very cool. 10 calories, it's pretty hard to believe, actually. You can get that much good flavor in something with so few calories. So That's awesome. You're not done giving advice, because I got one more big question for you, and that's for us. So we're on this journey. We're reinventing a credit union design for the future. We're going to be rolling out a new brand in the marketplace, new products, new lines of business, new value propositions, you name it. Um, any advice you would give to us as a organization that wants to be here to help Alberta into the future?
I tend to have words that, are more meaningful to me in given years. And last year, the word was grateful. This year, the word is community. And I really think that, the pandemic has helped us all value what's local, what our community is much more. And I think that's true for business as well. Again, I talked about it starting from the online store, building that community. And that was the foundation that allowed us to take these subsequent steps. So I think for your business, community is going to be key. And I think there's, particularly in banking and in a credit union format that, if you can tie in to your customers, how they're helping small business and how they have a stake in, this small business or that one that they frequent, I think it closes the loop and helps people understand the interconnectedness of our community.
I love it. And I appreciate that advice. And it's exactly what we want to make true. So, Ted, I want to thank you so much for joining us here today. I think you've been a great guest, an inspiring guest for so many people out there who are thinking about what's next for them and how they are going to go from small business to big success like you have done. So thank you for joining us today, Ted.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be on.
Next steps. There's a lot of inspiration for me, for all of us at Connect First, around the conversation we just had with Ted. He talked about how he built his community and how by being committed to that community, he was able to really help, build out the products that resonated and that ultimately have led to having market-leading products on the shelves of businesses across literally the globe. Well, that resonates with us because we're all about community too. And as we're reimagining what Connect First might look like for the future, we're listening to our members and we're listening to what a financial institution has to do differently if we're going to really serve their needs in the future. Another, interesting perspective for me was the patience that Ted has shown. Ted has shown incredible patience, and resilience. Starting conversations now, knowing that those relationships might be really important a year or 2 or 3 down the road. When he shared his story about his fundraising experience and so on, it just was crystal clear. These things do not happen overnight. And for all of us, when we're dreaming big about the future, we've got to be patient. And certainly for us at Connect First, as we're leaning into this adventure for the next decade around how we're going to be reimagining ourselves, we're going to have to be patient and hang in there with our members as we grow. And finally, something that really stood out for me with Ted was, the character that he personally displayed and the character that his business has. They stuck true to their values. They wouldn't put out a product that was anything less than spectacular. And they were passionate about that product. They were passionate about their community they had built and making sure they didn't let them down and delivering a product that was going to resonate with everyone. And if I would bring all this back together and really look at the industry that Ted is leading in, I would say, looking ahead into the future, consumer packaged goods is going to be a leading growth industry in this province in the future. We're big producers of primary agriculture. We produce some of the best primary products in the world. Yet right now, so many of those products get shipped overseas, shipped somewhere else, and then we buy them back at a premium. We can do way more here right at home, and certainly it's already happening. And I think the story of Ted really reflects that. So I think there's a lot of inspiration for all of us here, and certainly at Connect First, I'm selfishly really looking forward to how we can emulate some of the success that Ted has enjoyed. And I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today and hear those stories. But this is just the beginning. We've got more conversations to have. So join us on Twitter, join us on LinkedIn, share the stories if you like them, but please come back next time because we have more conversations to have around what's next for Alberta.